Right. Okay. So last week we started uh, we started talking about uh, diversification. In the first part of the lecture last week, we talked about how to value assets. I helped you revise evaluation technique, okay? Which analytic valuation technique, you know, the underlying technique is the same. It doesn't matter which type of security you are valuing, right? So what is the value of any asset? How do you define the value of any asset? It should be the present value of all of its future cash flows. So you need to know the cash flows, you need to know the discount rate, and we talked about what is that discount rate. The discount rate should be appropriate to the risk of that business, right? Reflecting the risk of the security or the cash flows in that business. Okay, so we looked at valuation of debt securities. We looked at the valuation of equity securities. We went through that equity valuation formula again, right? Okay, and then we started talking about portfolio, and I introduced you to the benefits. So why do we create portfolios? And the effect of diversification. So this is a slide that you have seen in the last week as well. So it shows, why diversification is important, and it's a very common sense approach, right? You need to diversify because you want to reduce your risk. You should not put all of your eggs in one basket. Right? And if all of your eggs are in one basket, and if you drop that basket, then you'll be left with no eggs. Okay, so you need to diversify. And then there are, uh, you know, so diversification is common sense. The next question is, how would you diversify? Right, so there are multiple approaches that you can take, right? But at the top, we have the simplest one, which is 1/n rule, right? You spread your eggs equally across the number of baskets that you have. Next, we have this diversification strategy that was proposed by Henry Markowitz, which says use as many baskets as possible and then find the best number of eggs in each basket. The best number of eggs essentially means weight. How much weight you're going to put in that particular asset. Okay? How much money you're going to invest in that particular asset relative to your total size of investment. And lastly, we have a further uh, diversification strategy, okay, and which says find the best baskets first, and then worry about how to spread your eggs. Okay, so you need to identify the baskets, identify the assets or securities first. Then you need to worry about how much you're going to invest in each of those. So we'll build on this, and I'll show you why diversification is important. So we'll go through this. We'll look at the broader picture first, and then we'll go to the technical bits, how to calculate the effect of diversification. So we'll do the two things together. Okay. So what are we going to learn in today's session? We'll talk about measuring aggregate risk from several assets, but for simplicity, we'll work with an example of two assets. We'll, we introduced, we already talked about this modern portfolio theory by Henry Markowitz. We'll look at the effect of diversification, and we'll try to differentiate between systematic risk and non-systematic risk. In your third year of your undergrad degree, you must be familiar with these terms. So we'll quickly revise these terms. We'll quickly go through these terms again. And lastly, I'll show you some evidence of international diversification. Okay, so the key benefit of diversification, as we already know now, is risk reduction. Why do you want to diversify? Because you want to reduce the risk. Is there some evidence that suggests that diversification reduces risk. Okay, so what do we have here on this slide? We have risk of individual stocks and the stock market indices. So we have stocks from the different stocks from different markets. Okay. So we'll look at the risk of individual stock relative to the index in the same market. Okay, so BP is a British stock, so its risk measured through standard deviation is 16.3%. Okay, and then we have a UK index. So what is an index? Collection of stocks in that market. Okay, so here we haven't kind of specified which index it is, but for the purposes to show the effect of diversification, all we need to know that it's a composition of different stocks. It's not just one stock. It's a combination of different stocks. So the UK index standard deviation is 12.2%. So which is lower than the rest of the individual stock BP in that market. So BP is probably one of the assets in that, one of the securities in that index already, right? So then we have a Deutsche Bank risk 23.2% compared to the risk of a German index, which is 11.3%. Again, you can see if you combine different assets in your portfolio, the risk goes down, right? You can see in terms of their standard deviations, right? Okay, so there are other stocks and other market indices as well. But if you go through the list quickly, you'll see the risk of the individual stock will always be greater than that of a portfolio. Portfolio being represented by the index. So you can see diversification works. Diversification helps to manage and reduce risk. Okay? So that's why we should diversify so that we can reduce our risk, reduce our investment risk. So this highlights the importance of diversification and why we should always diversify. We should not put all of our eggs, all of our money in one stock, all of our eggs in one basket, and take in case of investment, all of your money in one security or one type of asset. Okay. So Henry Markowitz defines this modern portfolio theory as follows: the only information that is relevant in investment selection is the expected return and variance of returns. So when you're going to make an investment decision, what you should care about? The return that you're going to get from that investment, and the second important thing is how risky that investment is. Okay, so that's the only thing you should care about. Risk of the investment and expected return of that investment. The utility from an investment is analogous to the expected return. So the benefit that you'll derive from that investment is the expected return. That's why you are investing. Okay? And the utility will be inversely analogous to the variance of returns. Okay? So the benefit that you'll derive comes in the form of expected return of that investment. Okay? But that utility is inversely related to the risk of that investment measured by variance of those returns. Okay, so this is a simple graph that shows the expected return and risk relationship. Right? We must have seen this a number of times already. Okay, so what do we have? On the horizontal axis, we have expected return. Sorry, on the vertical axis, we have expected return, and on the horizontal axis, we have the risk measured by standard deviation. And so this line shows the relationship between risk and expected return. So what does it show? As the risk goes up, the expected return should go up, right? Okay. As the risk goes up, your expected return should also go up, right? So this shows the relationship between risk and return. Yes. Sorry? In the exam, would I ask you to draw the graph? I don't know. I might. I don't know. Right? Okay, if there is a question on this, and if you think drawing a graph would help strengthen your argument, you should draw it. If you think it will not help answer the question, then you should not draw it. Okay? It depends upon the question, requirements of the question. Okay? I cannot answer this question. Right? Okay? You have to make a decision. When you finish a question, it's no talking. All right? If you have, once you face a question, you have to decide, what is the relevant information that you need to provide to answer the question. Okay, I don't know what I'm going to ask in the exam at the moment. All right. Okay, good. Right. So at the moment, all you should care about is the material that is being presented and try to grasp that, right? Because then it doesn't matter, as long as you understand the material, it doesn't matter what question is being asked, right? You should be able to answer it because you know the material. Okay, good. Right. Okay, so previously I showed you that diversification helps reduce risk, right? And we have seen this from the data, right? Risk of an index is lower than that of an individual stock. So here's another graph that shows the same thing, right? So what do we have here? We have data over multiple years from 1993 to 1998. Okay, so we have Biotech General at the top. Then we have another form, Compact, which is in the middle. Okay, so what do you think about Biotech General? So the bars show you the returns of that stock over different periods, right? So if the bar is above the horizontal line, it means the firm made a positive return in that year. If they're, if it's below the line, if the firm made a negative return in that particular year. So you can see the firm, firm has, returns. I think these are quarterly returns or monthly. Let me just double check that. Yeah, I think these are monthly returns, right? So you can see, there's a lot of variation in these returns, right? So some months firm generates a positive return, other months firm generates a negative return, and some months the returns are really high. Other months they're close to zero, right? So there's a lot of variation. Okay, so what do these? What's the distribution? Okay, what do you think about the distribution of these returns? Is it like a normal distribution? Does it look like a normal distribution? I mean, it's harder to see like this because we have not put them in brackets. Different return ranges. But if you look at the first one, you'll see a lot of variation, right? In some months returns are really high, in other months returns are a bit, not so high. But if you look at this bit in the middle, the compact one. So again, you see a lot of variation, right? These are returns of individual stocks. I call it like stock one, stock two. And then we have this third one. And what this third one is? This is simply a combination of stock one and stock two. Okay? So stock one has a lot more variability in returns. Stock two also has some variability in returns, probably not as much as stock one. But when you combine stock one and stock two together, you'll see that this variation in return goes down. Okay? So now we can see, the changes are much smaller, right? So again, this kind of proves that diversification helps because it reduces the risk. It reduces the extreme changes. Okay? So stock one, a lot of variation, a lot of risk. Stock two, again, a lot of variation in returns, a lot of risk. When you combine stock one and stock two together to form a portfolio, the variation in return you can see has significantly gone down. So again, this shows diversification reduces the risk. Also, if you invest in stock one alone, right? If you're lucky, you will make a lot of return. If you're unlucky, you will lose a lot of money. Okay. Similarly in stock two, but you can manage your risk. Instead of investing in stock one alone or instead of investing in stock two alone, you can reduce your risk by investing in both. Okay, so you can see the variation in returns is a lot less in the portfolio. So diversification helps to reduce risk. Okay, so one of the questions that I asked you uh, in the last session was how many securities do we need to reduce the risk or manage the risk? Okay, so we need to diversify. Should we invest in every single security, every single asset? Or is there an appropriate number of securities that we must invest in to reduce the risk? Okay. So this slide helps answer that question. On the horizontal axis, we have the risk measured as standard deviation, and on the horizontal axis, on the vertical axis, we have the standard deviation, and on the horizontal axis, we have number of securities. Just one minute. Okay. Okay. And what do you see here? If there is just one security, if you invest in just one security, the risk is going to be quite high. But as you add more securities, your risk starts to go down. Okay, standard deviation starts to go down. All right. Okay, so as you add on more securities, adding on more securities means diversification. You're not investing in one stock or one asset. Okay, as you diversify, your overall risk tends to go down. Yes. So I just had a question. Yeah. Basing it off last lecture as well, where there was a counter argument to the diversification principle that if each individual stock has its own risk technically is just added up. So how does it reduce risk? So I just had a question: how does it work? Like purely just mechanically, I'm guessing. Like how does diversification actually help reducing risk? Right, very good. Okay, so basically you're repeating the question that I asked you in the last session, right? So in the last session I asked you, okay, stock one has its own risk, stock two has its own risk, and if you just add them together, why doesn't the risk add up, right? Okay, so we'll answer this in this session, okay? Just bear with me. I'll show you why the risk goes down. So let's look at the evidence first. So, what does the data suggest, whether diversification works or not, and then we'll look at the technicalities of it. Okay? What makes the risk go down? Okay? I'll show you that as well. So this graph shows that as you add more securities, as you diversify, your risk goes down. Okay? And right. So it goes down, but the rate at which the risk goes down decreases with the addition of additional securities. As you add on more securities, the marginal reduction in risk is lower. Okay? All right. Okay, so the marginal reduction in risk is lower. So, as you, let's say, reach about 10, 12 securities, as you add on like 13 or 14, the reduction is risk is, quite small. Okay? Okay, good. Do you guys have any other questions here? No? Okay. So looking at this graph, there is an obvious question that you can ask, and that is, as you add on more securities, the risk does go down, but you can't completely eliminate the risk. It doesn't go down to zero, right? Okay. So the risk is going down, but it doesn't go to zero. So which means diversification helps reduce risk, but it doesn't eliminate risk altogether. Okay, so it helps reduce risk, but doesn't completely eliminate the risk. Okay, can you think of any reason why does it eliminate the risk? Yes. Yeah, because there's chance that you would lose money on one or more of those securities in your portfolio. Yes. Very good. Excellent. Okay. So you can reduce the risk, but the risk that you're reducing is the risk that you can diversify away. So in the learning objective slide, I introduced this term, systematic versus unsystematic risk. So the risk that can be diversified away is only the diversifiable component of the risk. Okay, so there's an undiversifiable component or unsystematic risk. Systematic, right? So systematic risk can't be diversified away because as you add more securities, what are you diversifying away? Unsystematic risk component, which is unique to individual securities. But still, there's a portfolio. In a portfolio, you have all of the securities, and all of the securities would still be exposed to the market risk, the market-wide factors. Okay? So by adding securities to the portfolio, you're only diversifying away the unsystematic risk component, and the market risk component still remains. And this is what you can see here. As you add more securities, you're reducing the risk because you're taking away the unique risk by combining different assets in a portfolio. But all of these assets are still in the market, right? They're exposed to market-wide risk. So the component that you can reduce is the unique risk of securities. So diversification helps to eliminate or reduce the unique risk, the unsystematic risk, but it cannot take away the systematic risk. So that's why it doesn't go to zero. Okay? Good. Okay, so there are different types of risks. So what is unique risk? Which is specific to that particular security or specific to that particular firm. And then on the other hand, we have the market risk, which affects all the securities in that firm, all the securities in that market, right? Which affects all the firms. So examples of unique risk, for example, here we have projects do better or worse than expected, right? If you invest in one particular stock, that firm's project may succeed or fail, right? So that's a kind of firm-specific risk. Okay, other examples of which are closer to firm-specific is competition, maybe stronger or weaker, and then on the other end, on the other extreme end, the market-wide risk includes factors that would affect all securities in that market, such as changes in interest rate, okay, changes in inflation rate. Okay, so if there are changes in interest rate, changes in inflation rate, changes in government policies regarding how the business needs to be regulated or conducted, right? That would affect all the firms in the market. So diversification helps to reduce the unique risk, firm-specific risk, but it doesn't take away the market-wide risk. Okay, so this is another graph, another slide that shows, different types of risk. And so when you're thinking about creating a portfolio, what you need to pay attention to? You need to pay attention to firm-specific risk, because that is something that you can manage, not the systematic component. Okay, so you should look at firm-specific factors, and because that is the component of risk that you can reduce through diversification. Okay, good. Right. Okay. So let me just um, give you a quick uh, example to think about. So let's say we have two identical firms. Okay, I want everybody to pay attention to this example. So we have two identical firms, which means they are, given that they are identical, they are exactly the same, right? Okay, two identical firms, same assets, same sort of operations, everything same, right? Okay, and then I ask you, the only difference between the firms is how those assets are financed. One firm has debt in its capital structure, the other firm doesn't. Okay, are you guys with me? Right? So two identical firms, right? The only difference between them is in terms of their capital structure. One firm is, let's say, all equity finance, the other firm has, let's say, 50% debt and 50% equity. Right? Okay? Good. Okay. So which firm would you invest in? Would you prefer an all equity finance firm, or would you prefer a firm that's 50% debt and 50% equity finance? You prefer the all equity firm. Okay, good. Anybody else? Okay. There's no right and wrong answer here, right? It's just a preference. You'll go with equity, all equity, right? Probably the same, all right? Anybody would want to invest in a firm that has 50% debt and 50% equity. Okay, right? You'll go with some debt and some equity, right? Okay, good. Okay, so okay, right. So this, so given that the two firms are identical, and the only difference is in terms of capital structure, right? So we know if the firm has debt in it, it becomes more risky, right? Is that right? If the firm has debt in its capital structure, it makes the firm more risky. Is this correct? Yes or no? If, right. Yes. Yes. Okay, so pay attention. All right. If the firm has debt in its capital structure, the debt makes the firm more risky. Yes or no? Oh. Right. Okay, thank you. Thank you for this. That's a good question. Okay. Okay. But this is the question that you should be able to answer. Right? What do you think? Is that true? Yeah, that's true. That must be true, right? Okay. As you add debt, it makes the firm more risky because you're adding on the financial risk, right? As you add on more debt, you're increasing the firm's bankruptcy risk, right? Okay. So this, what do you call it? Leveraging up, right? Leveraging up. So as you lever up, it makes the firm more risky, right? Okay. And okay. So what I would recommend. So once once the session ends, go back. Once you go back, you must have taken corporate finance, right? Okay. So go back to your corporate finance lecture notes or books, right? And look at the effect of capital structure again. Okay. As so you'll see, I'm pretty sure in the lectures and in the books there are examples that show as the two identical firms, one with all equity finance, other has some debt in it, and if you're given some sort of return, some sort of sales figures, right? You will see that the earnings per share of an all equity finance firm will be lower compared to earnings per share of a firm that has debt and capital structure in a good scenario. But in a bad scenario, earnings per share of a firm that has debt will be lower compared to that of an all equity finance firm, right? All this shows earnings per share measures return to investors, right? Okay. So with that, there's a greater variation in earnings per share across different scenarios, right? In good scenarios, your earnings per share will be really high, and you as shareholders will be really happy. But in bad scenarios, your earnings per share will be even worse as compared to an all equity finance firm. So you will be really upset, right? So by adding that, you're increasing the variation in earnings per share. And variation in returns, variation in earnings per share is basically risk, right? This variation in return is what we call risk. So as you add more debt, it makes the firm more risky, right? Because it introduces greater variation in earnings per share, right? Greater variation in returns, okay? So the question whether you should choose an all equity finance firm or a firm that's partially financed with debt and partially financed with equity is simply a matter of preference. If you are a risk, if you prefer to take on more risk, right, you might opt for a firm that's financed with debt and equity, or if you are a risk averse person, you might go with a firm that's all equity finance. But with respect to this, what we're covering today, so this additional risk that you are creating because of adding debt is based on managerial decision, right? This is based on managerial decision, how you have chosen to finance the firm. It's not a market risk, right? Okay, it's not a market-wide risk. So by adding debt to your capital structure, you're making the firm more risky. But it's because of your managerial decision to add debt to your capital structure, right? So this is not a unique risk. Okay. So this is not a market-wide risk. Okay. So this is a unique risk to the firm because of the managerial decisions to add more debt to your capital structure. Okay. So when you go and invest in the market, right? What should you be compensated for, right? Previously, I showed you this relationship between risk and return, right? This relationship between risk and return. Okay. Right. So as you add on, as the risk goes up, your expected return should go up. But which risk are we talking about here? Are we talking about addition to the risk, which is based on managerial decision to increase leverage, or is it something else? Okay. The decision to add on more debt is a firm-specific risk, right? So you must not be compensated for that. So this relationship applies only for systematic risk. Okay. So what should you be compensated for? Which risk should you be compensated for in the market? Only the systematic component. Okay. You should only be compensated for the systematic component of the risk. And why is that? Why should you only care about systematic risk? And why should you only be compensated for taking on the systematic risk? Because that is the risk that you cannot manage, right? So if I give you this option to choose an all equity finance firm versus a firm that's 50% debt finance and 50% equity finance, right? It's your choice, your risk preference. But if you decide to take on the risky firm, which is debt finance, should you be compensated for holding a debt finance firm, a firm that has higher risk simply because it has leverage in it, right? No, because it's your choice. You could have, so you'll only be compensated for systematic component of the risk and not the unique component of the risk. And the reason is quite simple. Because you can diversify away that unique risk. If that risk can be eliminated through diversification, then why should the market compensate you for it? Okay? Market should only compensate you for the risk that cannot be diversified away. Okay, so there are different names for unique risk. It's called specific risk, variant, idiosyncratic, unsystematic, diversifiable. Okay, and as we know, it refers to the firm-specific risk. Similarly, there are different terms used to represent the market-wide risk, right? It's the systematic risk, is the covariant, undiversifiable risk, okay, and refers to the general economic conditions that may affect the performance of the company. Okay, so under the modern portfolio theory, it can be proven that in an efficient market and market equilibrium, only the market risk matters, right? Okay, because the unique risk can be eliminated through diversification. Because it can be eliminated through diversification, so there is no compensation for that. So the relationship between risk and return is between systematic component of the risk and the expected returns. Okay. And you can see, you know, so only the market risk is important, and that's what matters, because the unique risk can be eliminated. And how that unique risk can be eliminated? Through diversification. Okay, so that's why diversification is extremely important. Because even if you hold a portfolio that doesn't diversify away all of the unique risk, you might still end up holding a more risky portfolio than the market. Okay, and you will not be compensated for holding a portfolio that doesn't eliminate the unique risk. Okay, so now we go back to the question: as you add more securities in the firm, why doesn't the risk add up, right? Okay, so how does diversification reduce risk in a portfolio without sacrificing returns? Okay, so the technical bit that I said, as I showed you evidence that diversification works, it helps reduce risk. I showed you different data and different examples to prove that first. So now we'll see how diversification works and why diversification works, right? So diversification benefits depend on the correlation of returns of the investments in that portfolio. So diversification, the benefit of diversification depends on correlation between returns of assets in your portfolio. Okay, so what is correlation? What is correlation? Anyone? Yeah. The way that two variables react to the other one changing. The way two assets move together, right? Okay. Okay. So that the okay, so correlation measures how the two assets, how the returns of two assets move together, or otherwise, right? Okay. How the returns of two assets are related. Okay. And the values of correlation range from -1 to +1. +1 means perfect correlation, right? +1 means perfect correlation. If the return of stock one, if there is a correlation of 1, right, between two stocks, stock 1 and stock 2, right? If stock 1 increases by 1%, stock 2 will also increase by 1%, right? That's what perfect correlation would mean. If stock 1 goes down by 5%, stock 2 will also go down by 5%, right? So you can see in terms of their association, the two are identical, right? Stock 1 and stock 2, they only differ in name. But in terms of the return, in terms of their time frame, they're identical. If stock 1 moves up by 10%, stock 2 will move up by 10%. If stock 1 goes down by 10%, stock 2 will also go down by 10%, right? So if you add securities like this, there is no diversification because these two stocks are actually identical in terms of their return movements. Okay? So you will not have any diversification benefits when the stocks are perfectly correlated. When correlation is +1, there is no diversification whatsoever. Okay? The benefits of diversification will only accrue when the correlation between stocks that you're adding into your portfolio, when the correlation is less than 1. And the benefits will be greatest when the correlation between the two stocks is -1, which means the two assets are perfectly negatively correlated. Okay? If the two assets are perfectly negatively correlated, they will eliminate all of the unique risk. Okay, so if two stocks are perfectly negatively correlated, stock 1 will increase by 10%, stock 2 will decrease by 10%. Okay, if stock 1 goes down by 4%, stock 2 will go up by 4%, right? Okay, so the two will move in exact amounts in opposite directions. So benefits of diversification will be greatest when the two assets are perfectly negatively correlated. But it's so if you want to create a portfolio, right? If you want to eliminate the unique risk, so what you should look for? You should look for assets that are perfectly negatively correlated. Is that right? Okay, is that right? What did I say? Perfectly negatively correlated with its -1. Yes, then what happens then? Maximum diversification. The benefits of diversification are at maximum when the two assets are perfectly negatively correlated, right? Okay, so if you want to create a portfolio, if you want to diversify, what should you do? You should identify stocks or assets that are perfectly negatively correlated, right? Is that right? That's what all of you should do, right? To create a portfolio. Can you find assets that are perfectly negatively correlated? Yes? No? Can you find assets that are perfectly negatively correlated in the real world? It's extremely unlikely, right? It's extremely unlikely, right? So in real world, it's hard to find assets that are perfectly negatively correlated. So if you can't find assets that are perfectly negatively correlated, so what should you do? You should find assets that are least correlated, either negatively correlated, and if you even if you can't find assets that are negatively correlated, then you look for assets that are least correlated. Okay? Okay, so the lower the correlation number, the greater the effect of diversification, right? And that's how diversification works. Okay, good. So this is a mathematical representation for correlation. Okay, so it measures how the two stocks covariate with each other. Okay, so how do we measure correlation? It's the covariance between stock 1 and stock 2 divided by standard deviation of stock 1 and stock 2. Okay, what is this? It's the variance of stock 1 or stock X. Right? We all know these formulas, right? Okay, and if we take a square root of this, then we get the standard deviation. Okay, so standard deviation is simply the square root of variance. Okay, so we have variance of stock 1, variance of stock 2, which is the deviations, square of the deviations from the mean. So this is the return of stock I, right? Stock Y, you know, minus the mean of returns of that particular stock. Okay, good. So variance of stock 1, variance of stock 2, right? And what's the covariance? Okay, it's the variance. Okay, so if we take these, if we convert these to standard deviations, right, by taking the square root. So this is how we represent the covariance. So you can see covariance measures how the two stocks move together. Right. Okay. So then we represent this in the graphical form as well. So the negatively sloping line represents perfect negative correlation. When the two stocks are perfectly negatively correlated. I gave you an example of this. If stock 1 goes up by 10%, stock 2 must go down by 10%. In the middle, we have a graph that shows no correlation, right? So there is no correlation in the returns of the two stocks, right? That's why we have a horizontal line. Okay, and then in panel C, the third graph on the right, okay, we have a perfect correlation. Okay, positive, not perfect. Yeah, perfect correlation, right? Okay, we have perfect correlation as the slope is upward sloping. So if slope 1 goes up by 10%, slope 2 also goes up by 10%. If slope 1 goes down by 5%, slope 2 also goes down by 5%. Okay, so if you have stocks in your portfolio that are perfectly correlated, right, as in panel C of these graphs, although you are creating a portfolio, right, you are creating a portfolio. You have added two stocks together, but you will not get any benefits of diversification because in terms of the return movements, the two stocks are perfectly correlated. Okay, you'll get the greatest benefit if the correlation is -1, but if correlation number is any number other than +1, right? You will still get some benefit of diversification.
I don't understand like why they need to be perfectly negatively correlated because if one goes up by 10% and the other goes down by 10, surely you'll start making any money.
Right, very good. Of course, in this case, you're not going to make any money, right? But you're not your risk is also zero, right? So with zero risk, you're not taking any risk, so your return will also be zero, right? And what have we learned in finance so far? You know, over all these different modules, there is a relationship between risk and return, right? So the more risk you take, the greater will be the expected return. Okay? If you completely eliminate all of the risk through diversification, right, your return will also be lower. It may not necessarily be zero, right? It would depend upon the assets that you have selected in your portfolio. I'll show you some examples of these, right? Okay, but it will not be zero. Okay. Good. Because once we introduce a risk-free asset, right? Once we introduce a risk-free asset, which means it has zero risk, it still gives you some sort of return, right? If you take any more risk above the risk-free asset, above the risk-free rate, then you should be compensated for that. Okay, good. Right. Okay. So, what is the conclusion that we draw? That when we are creating portfolio, we need to, first of all, portfolios are better than individual stocks, right? But they're only better than individual stocks if the correlation between assets that you have included in your portfolio are not perfectly correlated. Okay. So ideally, you should invest in stocks or add stocks in your portfolio that are negatively correlated. If you can't find such stocks, you should identify stocks that are least correlated. Okay, so what do we have here? So this is some data on international correlation. So that shows the correlation across markets, right? So correlation between Australia, uh, and France, for example, is 0.29, right? Okay, so if you, so now we are moving to international markets. So here we are talking about international diversification. Okay, if you want to get the most out of diversification and achieve the optimal portfolio, then you need to take into account the international diversification into account as well. So what you'll do here, you look at the correlation between different markets and then choose investments from markets that are least correlated because that would increase the benefit of diversification. Okay, and this is the result. Okay, so if you only hold securities in the US market, this will be the this will be your portfolio, right? So it's a similar graph that I showed you earlier. As you add on more securities in your portfolio, we know the risk goes down, right? Your total risk goes down. Okay, but what if you only hold the US securities, right? So you're diversifying away the unique risk of securities in the US market only. Okay, so risk does go down as you add on more securities, right? But if you take into account, if you want to reduce your risk even further, then you need to take into account other markets as well. So if you include other markets and take into account the correlation across markets in creating your portfolio, and you can see once you include international stocks in your portfolio as well, the risk goes down further. Okay, so as you as you diversify more, as you diversify across countries as well, the risk would go down further. Okay, so the more you diversify, the greater is the reduction in risk. But the key to that is the stocks and the markets that you would choose in your portfolio should be least correlated. Okay, so correlation is key to all this. Okay, so this is again another a graph that shows the same thing. So if you only invest in Swiss market, diversification would reduce the unique risk of stocks in the Swiss market alone. But if you add US stocks into your portfolio, risk goes down further. If you create an international portfolio, investing in stocks from different markets, right, to international diversification, you can have the lowest risk. Okay, good. So the correlation of the US stock market with the returns on the stock market in other nations varies, as we have seen through these graphs. Okay, the correlation of the US stock market with the Canadian market is about 72%. Okay, do we have Canada here? Not in this graph. Okay, good. The correlation of the US stock with the Japanese stock market is 31%. Okay, so if you are a US investor, right, and you want to create an international portfolio, which market would you prefer to invest in? The Canadian market or the Japanese market? Japanese market, right? Because Japanese market is less correlated with the US market. So if you want to increase the effective diversification, you should choose to invest in assets of Japanese market as well. So a US investor would get more diversification from investment in Japan as compared to investment in Canada because the correlation between Canadian market and the US market is quite high, 72%, whereas it is a lot lower in the Japanese market. Right, okay, so what do we have here? So this is, so what do we have here? We have a combination of different stocks. Basically, we have different portfolios. So this is international diversification, right? Okay, and the red line here is what we call the efficient frontier. So what is this efficient frontier? It shows all the portfolios that you can create. Okay, you can't create a portfolio above this line, which means that this is the maximum return that you can earn for a given level of risk. Okay? So portfolios cannot lie beyond this efficient frontier. If you want to create an optimal portfolio, what should you, which portfolio should you select, right? So all of these points. Now, so here we have Japan, right? That's the Japanese market, portfolio of stocks in the Japanese market. And then we have the US market, right? We have Netherlands, we have Italy, we have German market, right? Hong Kong market. So these are portfolios basically of those individual markets. Okay? So which portfolio should you choose? Right? If you want to create an internationally diversified portfolio, you should choose a portfolio that lies on the efficient frontier, because that will give you the maximum possible return for a given level of risk. Okay? So that's we'll okay. We'll come back to this uh, with some examples. But before we go a bit further, let me just explain one more point. So this blue line, what does this blue line does? The blue line shows the relationship between the risky portfolio and a risk-free asset. Okay, so this blue line shows the of combination of a risk-free asset and a risky portfolio. Okay, so you can create a portfolio not only based on these risky stocks or risky markets, but you can add a risk-free asset to your portfolio as well. Okay, good. And we'll go through in some detail about how this works in the next session with some examples. Right, so composition of the optimal international portfolio for US investor holding period between 1980 and 2007 would look like something like this, right? So this is how an optimal portfolio for a US investor would look like. Okay, so investors should invest something around 4.82% in the Australian market, 31% in Netherlands market, 20% in the US market, right? So this, you can see you can create an optimal international portfolio by investing different amounts in different markets. Okay. Good. Okay, so portfolio diversification and correlation with market portfolio. So from the graph, what have we learned? As we add more securities in our portfolio, our risk goes down, right? So this shows something similar. So on the first column, we have number of securities in the portfolio. The second column shows the standard deviation, and third column shows the correlation with returns on the market portfolio. Okay. So as we add on more securities, we can see the standard deviation goes down. Okay. And if you look at the correlation tends to go up. Right. So you can see there's an inverse relationship between number of securities and there is a positive relationship between number of securities and correlation. Right. Can anyone explain this? Why is this the case? As you add on more securities, the correlation goes up. Yes.
If you increase the number of securities, your risk would go down. So you get close to the risk-free rate. So you would expect.
No, your risk would go down. True. No, but risk is something else, and risk-free rate is something else.
So the market portfolio would represent the risk-free rate.
Yeah, as you add on more securities in your portfolio, right? You're taking away the unique component of the risk, so you're getting closer to the optimal portfolio, right? Okay. Okay. And from the graphs, we also know that the risk reduction goes down substantially as you add on more securities. As you add the first few securities, there's a significant reduction in risk. So there's a sharp decline in risk. But as you keep on adding more securities, the marginal risk reduction is quite small. Okay, why the marginal risk reduction is quite small? Because as you add on more securities, the correlation of your portfolio with the market portfolio increases. Okay, so as the correlation increases, the marginal benefit of adding additional securities is lower. Good. Okay. So this is an exercise basically for you. Uh, you can think of it more as a homework. Uh, so what I want you to do is to think about risk and how do we measure risk, right? So far what have we learned? We learned that the risk that matters is only the unique component of the risk. Is that true? No, right? Which risk matters? The market-wide risk, right? Systematic risk. Okay? So the risk that matters is the systematic risk. So we need to be able to measure systematic risk. Okay? So what is the risk of the Facebook stock? Or you can take any stock for an example, right? You can take any stock. So what I want you to do is to measure the systematic risk when you go back home, right? You can choose a stock of your liking, right? And then try to measure its systematic risk. Okay, how do we represent this risk and return relationship? So this is a formula that we have seen a number of times earlier. So this is what we call capital asset pricing. It shows the relationship between risk and return, right? Okay, so what is the return on security I? It should be the risk-free rate plus beta times the excess market return. So the term in bracket is what we call excess market return. Risk above, risk above, sorry, return above the market, above the risk-free rate because you have chosen to invest in a risky market. Okay, so the term beta is important here, right? So beta measures the covariance of assets and the market. So divided by the variance of the market. So beta measures the systematic risk. Okay, beta measures the systematic risk of the stock. So if you invest in Facebook, what you should care about the beta of this Facebook, because that measures the riskiness of the Facebook stock relative to that of the market. Okay, so how risky Facebook stock is relative to the market. If Facebook is more risky than the market, so your expected return should be higher. If Facebook is less risky than the market, your expected return should be lower than that of the market portfolio. Okay? So beta is really important as it measures the systematic component of the risk. Okay. So capital asset pricing model, you already know about it. So as I told you, beta measures the systematic component of the risk. So beta of the market is 1. But stocks can have beta greater than 1 or less than 1. If beta of the stock is greater than 1, it's more risky than the market. If it's less than 1, it's less risky than the market, and the expected returns on those stocks should be in line with the riskiness of those stocks. Right. Okay. So another important thing that you need to remember is that when you're talking about the capital asset pricing model, you need to be aware of its limitations as well. Assumptions that are made in that capital asset pricing model. Okay, so I'll quickly go through some of these assumptions. So individual investors are price takers. Single period investment horizons are okay, and then we have investments are limited to traded financial assets. What do we mean by a market portfolio? A market portfolio in theory should be a combination of all assets in the market, all assets in the market, right? It could be land, building, uh, your farm animals, gold mines, right? All assets. Okay, but in practice, it's difficult to create a portfolio of these. So we use stock market index as a measure of the market portfolio. Okay, and then there are certain other assumptions such as no taxes and no transaction costs, perfect information. There are no information asymmetries, and the players in the market have homogeneous expectations about the market. Okay, good. Right. So you have some homework to do in terms of uh, measuring the beta of a stock. Slides, there are examples, there are numbers, right? The solutions are also in the slide as well, but I want you to practice on these. Okay? So the formulas will be there, the numbers will be there. I want you to go through all of these numbers. Recalculate all of these numbers yourself to verify the numbers that are reported in the slides are correct. Okay? So this will be your practice as well. There might in the exam you should expect similar sort of questions. Okay? So what you'll have in the lecture slides as examples, I'll ask you not the same, but similar sort of questions in the exam. Okay, if there is a question on portfolios. So what is a portfolio? Portfolio simply consists of more than one asset, right? As soon as you have more than one asset, you're basically creating a portfolio. So what have we learned so far about creating portfolios? That we should include stocks in a portfolio that are negatively correlated. If you can't find assets that are negatively correlated, then you should find stocks that are least correlated. Okay, so the proportion of investments. Okay, the next thing that you need to worry about is how much money you're going to put in each asset. Right? If you have more than one asset, in what proportions you are going to invest in those assets? Are you going to invest like 50% in A and 50% in B, 40% in A and 60% in B, right? Or 10% in A and 90% in B? So the next question to ask is how much you're going to invest in each asset in your portfolio. Okay, so the portfolio will have, okay, so the portfolio will have its own expected return and risk. So when you create a portfolio by combining different assets, you can think of portfolio as an asset itself. Okay, it's a new asset. It's a different asset, which is different from its constituents. Okay. So you should treat each portfolio as an asset of its own. And like any asset, it will have its own expected return and risk. So how do we calculate the expected return of a portfolio? It's simply the average return of the assets in the portfolio. Right? Okay, so expected return of the portfolio is so here we have two assets. We call them D and E, right? So what's the return on this portfolio that consists of two assets, D and E? It's the weight of asset D times the expected return of asset D plus the weight of asset E times the expected return of asset E. Okay, so what are these weights? WD and WDE are weights of stock D and E in the portfolio respectively, and the sum of these must be equal to 1. right? Okay, so one represents your total wealth that you're investing into that portfolio. Okay, if you have like 100 stocks to invest, okay, so you could invest 50% in D and 50% in E, right? Okay. So the weight would be 50%, zero point 0.5 in D and zero point 0.5 in E. Right, okay, and here, as I said, there is an example. So you can put in different ways and then calculate the expected return when you get home. All right, I'll see you next week.